Roman Catholic world as well. And I meant to ask you this last time I had you on. I don't think we got to it, but this is a huge issue, and I've overlooked it because I don't actually know a lot of the history of deaconesses. What is it? First of all, tell us why do you think they want to push the deaconess issue? Because I think you're going to say, well, it prepares the way for women priests. And why is that such a big deal for people from Fordham and all these individuals and the archons that are paying and pushing that in Orthodoxy? First of all, why is that such a big deal, as well as what are some of the errors that people that are pushing that make about this term deaconesses in the early church? Because I think I did read you a blog post of yours on that.
Right. So, for one thing, we've already seen them do it in the Anglican Church,
right?
Because what they're doing is they're appealing to this idea. Well, there were deaconesses in the early church, so surely we can have women deacons today. But the problem is you're making a equation between the deaconesses and deacons that is not warranted by the historical record, because deaconesses didn't do the same things that male deacons did. Mm-hmm. There were some things that were similar, but there were big chasms. The biggest one being the only liturgical function that deaconesses had was in baptizing women. And that was because in the ancient church, they baptized adults in the nude. And so when an adult woman was being baptized, they didn't have the priest anointing her body. They had a deaconess doing that, and the priest was behind a screen, because they obviously would have been somewhat unhealthy for the men in the church who have been witnessing all those things. Well, they also would sing in the choir, like in the Hagia Sophia. The deaconesses were charged with keeping the women's side of the church in order, and they had the choirs that they ran, and they also visited women who needed to have communion brought to them, and that was a way of making sure that there weren't any questions about any proprieties when you had a clergyman of sorts in the same room as a woman. But they did not do the same thing that deacons do. They didn't serve as deacons. They didn't get up there and do litanies. They didn't do any of those kinds of things. But what these the Fordhamites are doing is they're using the fact that there was this office, but they're not saying let's restore it to what it once was. And they specifically say, no, that's not what we want. We want women deacons. And that's a big difference. So you're not talking really about deaconesses anymore. You're talking about women deacons. And and what happened in the Anglican Church was, once you said, okay, well, let's have women deacons, and then you have, maybe a decade or so of people seeing women running around in cassocks and Roman collars, and they're doing all the stuff that deacons do. And then you say, you know what? These deaconesses are pretty good. They're nice women. Why don't we let them be priests? You're going to have a lot less opposition after you've slowly turned the temperature up on the frog, get boiling in the pot, than you would have if you'd have said that right up front. Because right up front, you were saying, oh, we're just restoring the ancient offices of the deaconess. And then once you get women priests, you let that simmer a while until you turn up the temperature a little bit more, and you say, okay, let's have women bishops. And now they have and the whole 9 yards. So it's a step-by-step approach that gradually gets people used to an idea that they never would have accepted if you were honest and upfront right at the very beginning. I was actually raised in a church that actually always had women as being eligible for ordination. I was raised in the Church of the Nazarene, and a lot of Wesleyan churches and Pentecostal churches have this tradition, so you might say, of allowing women ministers. But what was interesting is back in the early days of the Church of the Nazarene, something like 20% of the pastors were women. But once the newness wore off, that ceased to happen. And I was in the Church of the Nazarene from when I was born up until 1990. I was born in 1966, left it in 1990. I never saw a woman pastoring a church. I went to school in the theology department with women who were getting the same degree that I got. But when I would ask them, what do you want to do? It was always things like, well, I want to get into youth ministry, or I want to get involved in music ministry. it was all things that in the Orthodox Church women do without being ordained as priests. And I think that the reason why this is so is that women naturally don't desire to take a fatherly role, which is what a priest is. A priest is a father to his parish, and women don't make good fathers, as we see, because we have so many fathers out of the home and women trying to raise their sons. Women don't make good fathers. They make great mothers, excellent mothers, bad fathers. And so in the Orthodox Church, we have women filling a motherly role in the parish. We have the office, the charismatic office of the babushka, and we also have the priest's wife and the deacon's wives, and they fill that sort of motherly role of guidance in the parish. And then you have the clergymen that fill that fatherly role, and it's healthy in that respect. But when you start trying to mix the two, you wind up with bad things, because one of the arguments these people try to make is that, well, maybe Christ didn't ordain any women apostles because people back in those days couldn't imagine women being clergy. Well, that's not true, and it wasn't true in the Old Testament either. There were women priestesses all over the place.
Yeah, pagan religion.
And there were women priestesses all over the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when you have women priestesses, you start getting into sort of a fertility religion.
Yeah, exactly.
because that's what that leads to, and it always head in that direction.
Yeah.
And in contemporary Protestantism, you have this tendency towards feminism, but it starts getting into sort of a
goddess,
a fertility religion, goddess worship of a certain sort.
Now, I'm guessing that people have that position. They're going to say, well, the people from Fordham or something like that. I haven't really looked at their arguments, but would they say something like, well, a deacon is a kind of a priestly role. I mean, the deacon has a degree of participation in priesthood. So therefore, a deaconess has to be then part of the priesthood. So then therefore, the deaconess should also be a potential priest. Is that something that they argue?
They would probably make that kind of an argument. But the thing about the office of deacon and deaconess is the word in Greek just simply means servant. And so to talk about deacons as a male office, and you have St. Ignatius of Antioch saying no church that doesn't have deacons, priests, and bishops can be called a church. So we have these three ranks of clergy. He doesn't say deaconesses. But to talk about deaconesses, they were servants of a different sort.
Yeah.
And so they served the church in a capacity that they were well suited for.
Now, did they at all teach or catechize?
I believe they did catechize women. They didn't catechize men, but yeah.
Because I'm guessing they would say, well, if they could get, because public teaching would be different than catechizing a woman, right?
Well, I think that when we talk about them having a role in catechism, it'd be in addition to the kind of catechism that they would have been getting from their local bishop, or hearing the homily on Sunday morning before they were dismissed with the dismissal.
Not an exclusive role where,
right?
Okay.
But they did play a role in that.
Because I'm just thinking of the text where Paul talks about, women shouldn't speak. I don't think he means he's saying having a teaching role is what I would think.
Well, he also says that he doesn't think women should have authority over a man.
Right.
And so obviously if you start having women clergy, you're violating what St. Paul's talking about there. And I don't think that you should take that so far that you would say that women can't do anything in the church.
Yeah.
Or that they could never tell, some man who's standing in the nave and he's got his legs crossed, sitting down on the chair, and some babushka comes over to him and says, "Hey, you should stand up. You shouldn't have your legs crossed in church." I don't think that would violate what St. Paul is talking about.
Okay. Yeah.
I think he's talking about the formal leadership of the church.
Now that's funny because that happened to me one time when I went to Antiochian church and I had pews. So part of the service we were sitting down. This was years ago, and I heard later on that that's a superstition that means that you are Xing out the crucifixion or something like that. Is that right?
I've just heard that it's considered in a lot of cultures, if you cross your legs, to be rude, even if you're doing it outside of church. So
really,
for Russians, if you're sitting in somebody's living room and you're crossing your legs, it's considered to be impolite. It's not in our culture, of course, but that's the way Russians look at it. At least that's what I've been told.
Okay. Well, I remember asking the Antiochian priest, this is years ago, because this was at an Antiochian church where everybody was Arab. And one of the ladies had said, when I was sitting on the pew in the back, she said, don't cross your legs. And I said, she didn't speak English very well, so I didn't understand what she was saying. I said, what do you mean? And I asked the priest later, and he said, that's something like his medieval or Middle Eastern superstition. So I didn't know it had a Russian element as well, but I never understood what that was all about. But I guess that makes sense.
Well, when the Psalms talk about Judas, it talks about how he lifted up his heels against
that's
against
where
Christ.
Yeah, that was it.
And I've not researched the meaning of that, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's some sort of sense that by showing your heels to someone, you're showing rudeness.
Interesting. I never thought of that. Okay. Now we know that the movement to push women priests is also ultimately, I think it goes deeper. I think it's been studied. It's a psychological warfare technique. It's all they push it because it doesn't just liberalize the church or promote equality. It's really a subversive thing that kind of undermines healthy human society functioning, the family. Ultimately, it's an attack on all those things and sort of the archetype of what a man is or what the patriarchal society is. So feminism is a part of that. Do you see a connection between the push of those things and feminism in the society as well?
Well, I think it whether they're intentionally trying to,
maybe not the people on the ground, but the power elite push this.
I would assume they probably know what they're doing, but the fact of the matter is, if you just talk about the objective truth, every church that's gone down that road has seen their numbers shrink. And so if you really want healthy, vibrant religious communities, you would seem to want to not do that.
Right.
But that's what they're pushing. And I would say maybe they really don't want that. Maybe their goal is really for us to get to the next level where we're in the Star Trek universe where, nobody gets paid to work and we don't have any faith and we just do everything because it's the good thing to do. That's the utopia that they're all trying to push us towards. So in any case, it doesn't end well. We know that. We've seen it over and over again. Every Protestant denomination that's gone down that road it's not ended well.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's a text in one of the minor prophets, I think maybe Amos, but might be Hosea, but there's a statement about God saying that because the people rejected him, he gave them sterility. So that the punishment was the sterility, which is what they wanted. So it's almost like these denominations and these groups or these parachurches or whatever, when they choose those things, they actually kind of wither themselves away because it's a choice to movement towards sterility away from life. So that was a really perceptive point there, that you would think you would look at the dwindling numbers.
One thing that definitely happens with these churches is you see men stop going to churches where women are running the show. And the thing is, if you want a healthy society, men have a natural male energy that can be directed in a positive way, or it can be allowed to go in a destructive way.
Right.
So if you want a healthy society, women should want to encourage men to take positions of leadership and to take responsibility and be supportive of that, because that's how men are able to do the good things that men can do.
Yeah. Doesn't
mean that women have no say in anything or that they ride roughshod over the women or anything like that. I don't think it's ever been the case, certainly not in Western Christian society, that women have just
had a bad time
doormats to the men. I don't think that's been the case. But men need that kind of encouragement, and so you have a healthy church when men are running the show. But it doesn't mean women don't do anything. You ask any Orthodox priest, and they'll talk about how the church wouldn't function without the women doing all the things that they do. But in a healthy parish, you have men not just sitting back and watching the women doing all that stuff, but stepping up and doing it too. And in an unhealthy church, you often see the women running things and the men just sitting back and say, "Okay, ladies, go for it."
I remember my priest, Father Vladimir, was talking about a period in the church in Russia when the Sovietism was basically over, but the women had basically been running a lot of the churches, and they were still trying to call the shots, and so they had to have this sort of rough period where, I guess, in the '90s, where because the Soviets, promoted basically a lot of feminist ideology, and so they had to battle.
The other thing is that during the Soviet period, I think that the KGB was a lot more likely to throw a man in jail if they saw him going to church than they were an old lady. So women went, and women can be fiercely loyal and fearless. And it's one of the great attributes of women. You see that in the story of the Gospels, where it was the women that went to the tomb and not the apostles. But that's what happened in the Soviet period, is women kept going to church and they were willing to take the risk.
Yeah.
And I went to Moldova last year, and the village that a lady in my parish is from, that we spent a lot of time in, the priest emeritus now, his two sons are the active priests. He's a retired priest, but he still hears confessions and stuff. He actually was one of the signers of the Moldovan Declaration of Independence. And before the end of the Soviet Union, I'm told that he got a lot of harassment from the KGB, but I was told that they feared his wife because she was willing to get in their face in a way that a man wouldn't, because I think KGB agents would feel a lot less qualms about beating up a man, but it would take a lot for them to be inclined to beat up a woman. and so that's how you got into that situation. I'm not really aware of the transition back to a situation where the men are coming back to church in large numbers. I'm not sure how that went because I wasn't there, but I'm sure that there was some difficulties. There's always a little bit of a transition. I know during World War II, our old Wright parish in Erie, they only had a male choir before World War II. But during World War II, all the men were drafted and they were serving in the military, or they were working in the factories or what have you. And so they had an all women's choir that was formed because that's what they needed to do to have services. Well, after World War II, they didn't go back to the all male choir. They had a men's choir and a women's choir. So if you go to that church now, you'll see that. And the women's choir, I have to say, is very impressive. More impressive, I would say, than the men in many ways. They all they could sing and take their eyes off the page, because when they would be censed, they would face the deacon who was censing them, raise their hands like this, and then make the sign of the cross and bow. And they would be singing while they were doing this and not miss a beat. So they were not looking at the paper, but they knew the text that well. So it was very impressive. Yeah. But so that's how that change happened.
All right, well, I've kept you for a good hour and a half. I don't want to keep you too long. Maybe next time, like I said, we'll get you back and have a conversation about your journey in the Protestant world, what you grew up with, and then what led you in the direction where you are now as Orthodox and as a priest. I'll have all of Father John Whiteford's links below. Anything you want to leave us with? Any thoughts about our discussion tonight?
Well, I would just say we need to keep praying for the church in Ukraine, and those of you that are in jurisdictions, particularly the Greek Archdiocese, need to be speaking out vocally about what your bishops are doing. Because if you want to avoid a schism in 2025, the only way it's going to be avoided is if they feel enough pressure ahead of time to where they decide maybe it wouldn't be such a good idea. So we really need people to speak up, and we need to support the legitimate church in Ukraine.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you very much, Father John. Appreciate it.